I want to say a massive thank you to my friend, DarknessPrevails, for featuring on this video. Make sure you go and check out his channel, he really is one of the best narrators out there. Thank you, my friend. If you want to see what I look like in real life, then follow my Instagram at Joe the Insomniak.
My Experience, submitted by Vincent. I tell this story not as a call for attention, but as a cautionary tale. I was 14 and in a scout troop. Our scout troop was relatively small. We were camping in an area adjacent to a large hill. It wasn't tall enough to be considered a mountain, but if you fell, you would probably break a few things. And it was super steep. This is necessary for the story. After we had pitched our tents, it was dark. It was only about 10 p.m., so we had some time to ourselves. We all decided to climb the hill together. We were scouts, so hiking was our thing. The hill was quite steep though, so we had to bring a rope and tie it to the fence. After I made sure it wouldn't come undone, we began to ascend. We walked around and found a section of fence that appeared to have been trampled over. Behind that fence, there was an old circular concrete building. We began to walk around the thing, and we soon found an entrance. There was a small box with a ladder that went up maybe about 20 feet or so. We all climbed the ladder and found a small steel door that gained us roof access, and the roof was huge. Across the roof, there was a heavy steel trap door. We opened it and found at least a 25-foot drop. There was a ladder, however, so us being the brave scouts we thought we were, we began to climb in. The area inside was cavernous and massive, with concrete braces holding the ceiling up and a light blue tarp along the walls. It was incredibly dark down there, so visibility was extremely limited. Now, some people in my scout troop thought they were funny, so the two people standing guard on the roof closed the trap door. And I mean we were trapped. Then, as if something inside with us could tell that we were stuck, we began to hear a certain click, click, clicking. We all thought it was ambient noises or rocks falling from somewhere, so we tried to ignore it and went on. But moments later, one of the scouts shouted, "Who is that?" He knew nobody was there. "Mike, what's going on?" someone else asked him. I felt someone breathing on my neck. Mike was now shouting. Knives drawn, we got close together. Somewhere else we heard a laugh, not that of someone laughing at a joke, but a distant echo of a laughing, insane person. It echoed throughout the old building. Someone turned on their flashlight, and to our surprise, we saw a man. He appeared to be homeless. His face was old and worn, his hair untidy. He was only wearing an old, ripped and stained pair of jeans, and he looked as if he had not seen the sun in decades. He was an intimidating and deranged sight. The man himself only scared us a little bit. What really scared us was the knife he was holding. Keep in mind, we saw this man suddenly and over the course of a single second. Then he began screaming. Thank the heavens that the screaming they heard concerned the two people that were on the roof who had trapped us. They knew us, so they knew that we were not capable of such an ungodly noise. They opened the trapdoor and shouted, "What was that?" And with that, the man ran towards us. We all wildly ran toward the ladder and climbed up, with the first guy literally jumping on. I happened to be the one in the way back. I was climbing up the 5th rung when something grabbed a hold of my foot. Panicking, I swung down at him. What I didn't realize was that I was still holding my knife. It was thankfully closed, and I ended up merely bashing him across the skull with the grip. He screamed again and let go. Thankfully, this allowed us to fully escape. I climbed up the ladder, and as I resurfaced on the roof, I saw the man bleeding. He was now climbing the rusty ladder. Just then, the door closed, trapping him in there. Not wanting to take any chances, we ran back to the small door, taking us to the room with the ladder to the exit. Again, I was the last one there, and I blocked it off. I ended up tying the bar to one of the ladder's rungs, using an old bicycle tire that was nearby. I got onto the ladder myself, and I rushed down. I met back up with my fellow scouts over by the exit. We all silently decided to never speak of this moment. We'd probably get in a lot of trouble anyway. We got over to the trampled fence, and we made our way back down. We didn't go back up that hill again. To make sure nobody else got any bright ideas, I untied the rope and I slid down the hill. The rest of the week was uneventful, but on the last night, I could have sworn I heard a distant screaming. Not that of a man in pain, but that of a man who had been driven into madness. Remember, if you do go urban exploring, bring something to defend yourself. If I hadn't had my knife in hand, I may not have been here to type this story.
I was driving to visit my sister who lives in Missouri. It's late, and I admit, I was a bit tired, but not bad enough where I should have pulled over to a hotel. I get to this stretch of road where it's just cornfields on either side of me. I have directions to drive straight and take the next left. I drive and drive and drive. No lefts, but many rights. Every now and then, there might be a left, but a small man-made sign that said road that wasn't big enough for my car. I start getting a bit confused on where I'm supposed to turn, because I've been driving straight for like 45 minutes, and still, there's no turn in sight. I pass a left turn that was big enough for my car, but was a dirt road. I figure, hell, that's probably it. I take the next right, and ended up driving around a cornfield paved road maze. I ended up lost for about 2 hours before I finally found the small dirt road. I drive up it and find myself at a home. This was obviously not the right left, so I threw it in reverse, and then went to leave when I saw a light from my field of view in my mirror and movement. I look over. It's a large group of people, over 10, standing around a fire coming my way. It's like 3 AM. I was lost. I've been driving in a maze for about 2 hours. I was truly in the middle of nowhere, and who the hell were them people? I floored it out of there. I was so worried that they were going to come back for me or do something. God knows what they were doing over there. I'm thinking of it. If you're in a group of people, why would you go up to a random car on its own with one driver? All I know is, it couldn't have been good. Luckily, I eventually found a gas station, waited for the morning and ran up my sister for help, and managed to find where she lived. A girlfriend and I took a 2-week round trip last year, and backwards camped and hiked the whole time. We got to one free campsite in the middle of nowhere, New Mexico, and we're the only people there, So we just take the first spot and set up. As we make dinner, a couple pulls in, drives by, and heads to the back of the campgrounds. About 20 minutes later, they come back by it and flag me down. "Have you seen guys back there?" Me, "No." The girl said, "It's a massacre." Me, "What do you mean?" Girl, "There's bones everywhere. Mind if we take the spot next to you?" Me, "Not at all." They stay for maybe 2 minutes, look around, get back in the car and leave. My friend said, "What's all this about?" I explained to my friend what the girl said at the moment. We then both look down and see a huge femur bone at our feet, possibly a cow. Well, us being a little cryptic, decided to go check out what they're talking about. We get about 100 yards back through the windy camp. There it is, full-blown animal carcasses everywhere, some scattered, some still whole. There's also one pile of what appeared to be a fox fur, another deer body still in a trash bag. Our theory is that it's where they dumped all the roadkill they scrape up off the highway, but we figured that it couldn't be this. Nonetheless, if there's that many bodies, from whatever cause, then a predatory animal knows they're here too. I don't want to be around that when they come for dinner. We decide to pack up and find another camp. Free campsite 2 of the night. We drive for about an hour or so. We're still in the middle of nowhere. Haven't seen a single car the entire time. No homes, just old country roads and pastures. Mind you, the sun is starting to set. The road turns to dirt for a bit. We cross a cattle guard and see the national park sign. Sweet, it's a national park, and it's free. It can't be too bad. My friend thinks it looks a little sketchy, but we relax and get ready for some food. So I hit a left and start up the hill to the national park. Looks like it's only 2 miles from the map. We start going up this road, go around a few curves. The bush on the side starts getting thicker and thicker, and the main road gets rough. Now, to put things into perspective, we're in the fairly new Chevy Cruze, manual transmission. That is less than a foot clearance off the ground. After about a quarter of a mile in, we high center on a massive rock. Okay, as long as this doesn't get any worse, I think we'll manage. There's no possible way to turn around or back out anyway, so let's keep going. Of course, it gets worse. Every rock and trench we hear the car just scrape and shutter and stall. I'm clenching the wheel, holding onto the handle. All the brush on the sides of us is now dead and eerie looking. The sun is almost gone behind us. 30 terrifying minutes later, we finally make it to the top flat that is supposed to be a campsite. It's about a 10-foot square clearing in the dead brush and in front of us off a cliff. We're still freaking out about the dead animals, and now we feel like we're in the plot of some low-budget horror film, literally stuck on top of this hill. It's dark. Neither of us even want to get out the car. We decide we cannot in our right mind stay here. Even from this cliff top, we can't see a single home or car light. We make a turn, and between the brush and the shoulders and the cliff, manage to get back on the path and very slowly and carefully back our way all the way out down the hill. We in the car miraculously survived and had another 2 hours to the closest town. We ended up sleeping in a Walmart parking lot.
For the sake of the story, you can call me Cal. I worked as a police officer for the Atlantic City PD of New Jersey for 18 years. When I retired, I pulled some strings from my many years of service on the force and from cooperating with New York police officials to get a job with the Adirondack Park Rangers. I'd always loved the great outdoors, something I missed while working in Casino Central at Atlantic City. And what could be more outside the loop than 6.1 million acres of woods, rivers, lakes, and mountains? I was looking forward to it, a quiet bachelor's retirement, preserving the forest and looking after the nature I loved. But as it would turn out, nature also holds a lot of terrible secrets. I arrived at the Adirondack Park in 1995, a year after my retirement, to my designated park ranger cabin. We were required to live and work on the reserve. I was driven up from Atlantic City by the guy I was replacing, a fellow we can call Joe. Joe had worked here for over 30 years, and in spite of his graying hair, he was still spry and full of life. After a long drive, we pulled into the clearing around the cabin. Joe showed me the well from which we drew water, where the power lines were, and around the small two-man cabin. As we were sitting on the front stoop, laughing, sharing fishing stories, and chewing on some cigars, Joe suddenly got very quiet. He trained his ice blue eyes on me and asked, "Do you believe in God, Cal?" My family is Italian and Irish. We're about as Catholic as you could get. My answer was an instant yes. Joe grimaced, grinding the stogie on the wooden railing of the porch. "I don't know about God myself," Joe said, staring at the old growth rows of oak that ringed the clearing. "The devil I'm more sure of, because I've seen him. He lives in those woods." I thought Joe was being overdramatic, and I chuckled. But he gave me a look, a cold, dark, and foreboding look, and my laughter extinguished. "You'll see what I mean soon enough," he said, disposing of his cigar in the garbage inside the cabin. As he came back out with his fedora, he paused and looked at me. "I love these woods, but there are dark things out there you couldn't even begin to imagine." For the first month after Joe left, I could almost convince myself his terrifying words were nothing more than park ranger hazing. He was initiating me to the camp by scaring me. Yeah, that was it. I quickly fell into the rhythm of ranger life, patrolling the woods and clearing paths, participating in biomass surveys with people from Albany. It wasn't all sunshine, though. Poachers were rife, and the anti-government militias training illegally in the park aren't friendly at the best of times. But after 18 years on the beat, those punks didn't scare me. What did scare me, to the point of quitting this job, happened late one night. Part of my old life on the beat was being a night owl, and being a park ranger was no exception. It was late one August, and almost 10 p.m., when the ranger station called in. They said a family had been separated from their little girl, and they needed all hands on deck to mount a search. I was instantly awake, putting down my dog-eared W.E.B. Griffin book, and hauling on my park ranger uniform and donning my cap. I met up with my boss, Captain O'Rourke, and he assigned me to follow a tributary of Grindstone Creek, near where the family had last seen their daughter. I led a bunch of civilian volunteers down the creek, armed with flashlights and intermittent firearms. There had been black bear activity in the area, so packing heat made sense. As we fanned out along the creek, I gradually separated from the others, scanning the forest until my flashlight caught something pink, totally at odds with the summer ground cover. I yelled out that I had found something. But then my flashlight panned up, and I wish, to this day, that I'd never done that. I'd found the girl, but she was in pieces, scattered across the clearing. What my flashlight had caught was her arm, no longer attached, with the stub of a pink t-shirt still there. I had seen horrible gangland violence, but nothing ever topped the brutality of this scene. I gagged, and that was when I heard it. It was a strange cooing, hooting sound. Something about the sound turned the blood in my veins to ice as I panned my light in the direction of it, and it felt like my soul died in my chest. Standing there, easily 7 feet tall, was this thing. That's the only way I can describe it. It was tall but heavily emaciated, about as wide as a lamp pole. I could see its ribs protruding out of its rotting gray flesh. Its feet were hooved, but it had hands like a man, albeit with long, disgusting black talons in place of fingers. Its head, that was what still gives me nightmares. Instead of a normal head, it appeared more as a buck's skull with a massive rack of 8 or so points. Its mouth was full of dagger-like teeth, which curved up and outwards the closer to the front of the mouth they got. In its jaws, I saw a piece of the child, dangling limply as it fixed me with a nightmarish gaze from demonic yellow eyes. I didn't move, nor did the thing, for a space of about 10 seconds, when it cocked its head to the side. It let out another coo hoot and took a step towards me. I screamed, and as fast as I possibly could, made for my revolver, but in the blink of an eye, it was gone, disappearing in the brush. The remainder of the search party found me pretty quickly, considering I had apparently and unknowingly fired my entire revolver cartridge into the now empty woods, and I'd been crying. When I explained what had happened, I lied, mostly to myself, saying that I saw a black bear, but that's definitely not what I remember. Whatever it wasn't natural, not of this world of the living. There and then that day, I quit my job. I left the Adirondacks, and I have never looked back. I pray that what I saw was simply some sort of vision or hallucination, but it was very, very real to that little girl.
I was driving back to school one fall. It's about a 12-hour drive, and I was doing it all in one go. There's a lot of middle of nowhere and teeny tiny towns on my drive. I really had to pee, and there hadn't been anything for quite a while. Finally, there's one of those freeway signs with food, gas, and lodging listed for the next exit. I've been driving for about 9 hours now. The sign said there was a gas station, as well as a fast food restaurant. Those have bathrooms, so I take the exit. Usually, those signs mean there is something right off the freeway, but I end up following the signs for several miles and finally see the fast food restaurant. It's just starting to get dark. As I pull into the parking lot, this little cat runs in front of my car, but I'm going slowly enough not to hit it. The parking lot's empty, and there isn't much around. Mostly trees. I get out of the car and see another cat, then another. I mean, there's literally about 30 plus cats that I can see, so probably a lot more that I don't. There are 3 colorings, all black, grey, orange. They vary in size but look basically identical. They all stare at me. I took a step forward. They all stepped back, almost simultaneously. I step back and they all move closer. I walk to the restaurant, get a drink, use a bathroom. I said to the person at the till, "Lot of cats here." She said, "Yeah." And that was it. This place is too weird for me. So I got back in the car and they're all still there staring at me. This time, I see giant bowls of food up in the trees. Someone's coming and looking after the colony. Just as I'm thinking this, I see a dark figure in the tree line. Nope, I've had enough. I got back in my car and went straight to the freeway. So for those wondering, this is my story. My father, my brother, and I were crab fishing deep in the jungles of Puerto Rico. A new place we had never gone in an effort to find some lucky finds of crabs. We had to go through an initial barbed wire boundary to really get to where the crabs were. After so, we split up to cover as much ground as possible. We spent so much time there that the sun had set and the forest was so impossibly dark. If no lights were on, you wouldn't be able to see more than a few feet in front of you in any direction. All alone, I trekked deeper in, phone in my hand. I'm looking down for movements or any possible signs of crabs rustling about in the bushes. I come across an old cement foundation which, after looking over, was just an abandoned house project which never got past a cement floor or proportion of a wall. Off into the distance though, I found a complete cement structure with overgrown vines and completely isolated from anything human related. Now obviously, with my knowledge of terrible horror movies, I knew I should be very careful while peering my head into one of the 3 compartments it had. In hindsight, horror movie knowledge should be just a bolt out of there. From what I could tell, it was supposed to be a lavatory, but was never completed. Weird thing was that in the first room, there was a square toilet-like structure with a really weird smell, cockroaches everywhere, which made me legitimately frightened that some might fall on me. The room in the middle was just square and empty, though the third had the layout of the square room with a shower. What was really odd about the whole thing, aside from what I'd already seen, was that in the square toilet of the first room, I peered in with my flashlight. There was an entire room underneath the cement structure, about a 12-foot drop underneath the cement square. There was some trash thrown down there, but the smell was stronger closer to the hole. I tried to see as much as I could, but there was only a dirt floor 12 feet underneath the actual floor. Weirdest part about this? I looked around the entire structure. There was no way through to the chamber, except through the square hole, about 2 feet wide. I then heard rustling everywhere nearby. I checked if it was a crab. It wasn't. I then got out of there.
Haunted Forest, submitted by Matthew 2829. I lived in the Philippines. It's a beautiful country, but in my case I lived in the northern part of the Philippines, known as the Mountain Province, and though it was quite serene out there, as a child I always felt like something was wrong in the forests near my house. The year was 1979, and there weren't many houses in our rural town. Only my relatives lived there really during the time. Back then, I was 9 years old, and I loved playing around with my cousin Brandon, who was 19, and worked part-time as a voluntary forest ranger. We often went to the forest near my house to play, In spite of our age differences, we still enjoyed hiking outdoors. At one point, we were next to a steep cliff, and I slipped, nearly falling off. Brandon caught me and helped me regain my balance. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the fact that the cliff even existed. We had been all throughout these forests before, and never once have we seen or stumbled upon this cliff. What I mean is, yesterday this cliff hadn't been there. We weren't even half a mile from the house. I tried to explain it to myself, and I just chalked it up to a landslide or something. As I dusted myself off and we began to walk again, we began to hear movements around us. "Who's there?" my cousin asked, and I felt chills coming out of my spine and my hair standing on end. "Anino, or shadow," my cousin whispered. "Do you see it?" I didn't reply. There are many of them," I said, finally, seeing it for myself. We turned back and ran as fast as we could. I remember shouting so loud, my mom came out rushing towards me. She saw me and got angry and said, "Why do you go out there alone like that? It's dangerous." I froze right then and there. "What do you mean? Brandon's right here with me." She got down on her knees and scraped some dirt off of my face. "Look, you got hurt." "Mom, stop," I said. "What did you mean? Brandon was just right here." I looked around me, and I noticed that Brandon wasn't there anymore. When I turned back to my mother, she had a very concerned and sad look on her face. With hesitation in her voice, she had to remind me, "Honey, remember, Brandon passed away just yesterday." I was in complete shock. Turns out, way back then, I did that quite a lot. Because when Brandon was gone, it hurt me bad. It took me years to get over it. But that day I remember vividly seeing him, seeing the shadows, nearly falling down a cliff. Was it all just a dream? Again, Brandon was a voluntary forest ranger in his time, and he had helped a lot of people in the woods. And before he passed, he had taken care of me a lot. Every time he had gone to our house, he would tell me stories about his adventures in the woods, about the shadows he'd see, the whispers he heard, and even the time he saw the tikbalong, a half-horse, half-human creature. I always thought those stories were only just stories. Anyway, that was what inspired me when I was 18, to serve as a voluntary ranger myself. I'm beginning to understand how it was for him. The nighttime whispering you could hear all around the woods. The strange movements you'd see out of the corner of your eyes. We used to have to work with partners. My partner, Andy, heard them too, the whispering. He was also very afraid to go out after dark and would try to get out of his duties at nighttime as much as possible. On one occasion when Andy and I talked about our girlfriends, just hanging out at the ranger station on a quiet night, we suddenly heard a terrible scream. Now, we would have gotten up and ran to the rescue as fast as possible. The thing is, it didn't sound like a man or a woman. It sounded like something else. Just the sound of it hurt our ears, as if whatever it was standing right next to us. When it stopped, Andy asked me, "What in the world was that?" I didn't reply right away, because I didn't know myself. Instead, after a few moments, I recommended that we shut and lock all the doors and windows. I still live here with my lovely wife, who's half Japanese, and our daughter, as well as a 1-month-old baby boy. And despite being very creeped out by the forests around us, I'm more determined than ever to protect my family and our neighbors from the things in the woods.
I used to run bread for a big red company and started at 3 AM. I had to drive to a few remote stores in little towns surrounding my own town. I was about halfway through the 50-mile drive to the next town. It was dark out. There were no houses around for a long way in any direction. I look on the side of the road ahead of me and see a backhoe, which was odd itself. Then, I notice his bucket is super high. As I get closer, I realize he's gutting a cow that's hanging from a bucket. Now, I grew up around ranching, so I wasn't freaked out. For some reason, I decided to slow down and help the guy. I can't explain the decision. When I stop next to him, he smiles and waves. So do I, and say, "Need a hand?" He cracks up, laughing, just hysterically slapping his knees. For some reason, I start to laugh. Now we're two guys cracking up, one covered in blood, the other with a truck full of bread. The reality of the situation makes its way into my sleep-deprived brain. I hit the gas and get out of there. I thought about it and realised that this guy drove a tractor in the middle of nowhere to kill someone else's cow. The other thing, it's 3 AM in the morning. Who knows how far away he has to drive this thing? No idea what the hell happened. I'm glad I escaped when I did. I went on a midnight walk with my girlfriend. The park by our home had a dirt trail that led up a small mountain. It was about a 30-minute walk to the top, but the view overlooking the city was amazing. At the top, the dirt path became paved concrete with a small sitting area. We stayed at the top for about half an hour. Upon leaving, things got creepy. As we began to head back down, at the point where the concrete met the dirt path, there are trash bags in a crescent shape in the corner of the path's intersection. It was not there when we first arrived. The pile was much too large and in the way for someone who likes to cut corners of the path not to notice. My girlfriend realised that it looked like a dead body and said to me if I noticed it on the way up. I was very sure that it was not there 30 minutes prior when we arrived. I was extremely sure. Nonetheless, there was no reason to freak my anxiety-prone girlfriend out, so I laughed and said that yeah, it's probably just trash. Visibility is low, probably about 5 yards. I didn't want to freak her out, but I was pretty tilted. I got heckled for being drunk and not listening to her, but in actuality, I was looking and listening for any signs of people around us. In my head, I was telling myself I was being paranoid, that it probably wasn't anything to worry about. I'm sorry I didn't have time to listen to your story about Jesse from work, but I was worried about our safety. We made it back to our car without running into another body. I kind of laughed at myself for being so worried, and felt also relaxation when we finally got back, not being in such a tense situation. A few days later, the local news covered a dead body found near a park in Anthem, at the top of the mountains. So it was actually a dead body. Literally typing this is making me shake.
In the early 2000s, when I had just graduated high school, I was looking for any and every way to get into the Forest Service. I wanted to work my way up to being a game warden, but that dream quickly subsided, Because when I was taken in as a park ranger around Devil's Den in Arkansas, I was smitten. The job never felt like a job, and it was very satisfying. Rarely did we have emergency calls, but when we did, finding that lost person or helping the injured get help, it left you with a feeling like you could actually have an impact on the world. All while preserving nature, of course. There was one emergency call, though, that was a game changer for me. I don't think I've ever been the same because of it. The year was 2005. It was early December and quite a cold year for Arkansas. We received a call that night that a child had gone missing. My first thought was who would go hiking during this weather, and why on earth would they bring their child? But wait, it gets better. It wasn't even a kid, it was a baby, a little over a year old in fact, and they hadn't been hiking. The couple lived just a ways from the park. They called in stating that their baby was gone after hearing sounds around their house. The window to the baby's room had been opened, and they heard footsteps heading in the direction of the park. Red flags were going up everywhere while I listened in on the details of the situation. Nonetheless, I grabbed my gear, and I set off to search my side of these forests and hills. 3 long, drawn-out hours later, and I was exhausted. I hadn't rested, drank much water, or eaten since I was back at the headquarters. The excitement and rush of quickly going to the rescue was fading, and I was ready to just sit down for a few moments. But that's when I heard the crying. Immediately, I ran toward it, straight uphill. The trees began to thin, and soon the tree line broke completely as I stumbled upon a clearing with a large flat-top rock in it. It was just one of many random boulders in the forests. I began to work my way past it when I heard the crying again. It was louder, and now I knew that it was coming from on top of the rock. Now, the boulder was easily 15 feet high, so despite my confusion, I grabbed onto any protrusion or opening I could find, and I climbed. It took me about 90 seconds to ascend the rock. Winded, I pulled myself up onto the flat top, and I saw the baby. He was wrapped and swaddled in light blue, crying. But oddly enough, there wasn't a scratch or speck of dirt on him, or the cloth for that matter. How in the world did he get up here in such a state? I was a fully grown man, and it took every ounce of energy I had to climb the rock, and there was no way I could do this while holding a baby. If multiple people had taken him and laid him up here, then the better question is why? Who on this planet takes a baby in the night, runs a few hours into the woods, lays the baby on a rock while making sure he's perfectly clean, then leaves without a trace? I was astonished and a bit creeped out, but I called for backup, as I couldn't get the child off the rock by myself. When the parents got their child, they were greatly relieved, but then they were quickly weirded out because they said that they hadn't swaddled the baby when they put him to bed, and that they didn't even own the blanket we found him in. This was easily the weirdest experience I had as a forest ranger, and the weirdest experience in my life, period.
I lived in a national park by myself for 3 months. Several times when I was going back to my trailer for the day, I would hear music, like a music box or an ice cream truck. It was always loud, and it sounded as though it was coming from my head. One day, I decided to look for the source, so I followed the dirt road past my trailer. The music continued. I couldn't tell if I was getting closer or not. I had my eyes on the trees and looked down just in time to avoid stepping on a snake. I scrambled back. It didn't move. I now realize it is dead, and it's not alone. There were 6 dead copperheads stretched out in the road, looking in the same direction. I went back to my car because I couldn't bring myself to step over them, even if they were dead. By the time I got my keys, the music had stopped, and I didn't hear it again. I was driving across country alone on the 10. I was in the middle of the desert. My car said I only had about 20 miles left in gas, so I pulled off to the first place that I'd seen for the last hour. Since I was young, sick, and a woman, I made the rule that every time I stopped for gas, I would only pay at the pump, and would never leave my car to go inside or anywhere else aside from the hotels I stayed at. So I swipe my card, and it's processing the transaction. It suddenly cancels, prompts me to go to the cashier. I try again. Halfway through trying it in my zip code, it cancels and tells me again to see the cashier. I look towards the convenience store. I see it has broken windows. It is boarded up and completely abandoned. Even the tool station sign is torn apart. I spot someone inside peering at me from between the boards. The second I see them, I jump away. They clearly didn't want to be seen, but kept trying to get me to come into the abandoned station by cancelling my transaction. Nope. I got back in my car and by some miracle made it to the next station 30 miles away.
Number 1. What we encountered in those woods. Submitted by Chris B. I lived in Tennessee, and I was a big fan of camping and hiking. In 2006, me, my girlfriend, and my cousin, with 4 other friends, had gone out on a hiking trip. My girlfriend's uncle had a rather large property he sometimes allowed people to stay at. In one remote corner of this land, he even had an old cabin that he would rent out occasionally, and this property was connected to a no man's land, as some people called it. You could go out there, as some of us had before, but you wouldn't see any other signs of people at all. We intended to rough it along the back trails with the intention to camp overnight. After a long hike, it got dark, so we built a fire and set up our small tents. Then we had a couple of beers, cooked a few hot dogs over the flames. It was pleasantly uneventful until near midnight. We had been telling stories when suddenly my cousin started looking off into the dark and began to try to hush us. Shh, guys. After a few moments of quiet, I tried to ask what was happening when he bluntly told me to hush up. I heard something like voices out there, I think. We all stayed quiet for the next minute or two. My cousin swearing he had heard voices calling out there past the tree line in the distance. Soon we began catching what sounded like the faintest yelling that we couldn't quite make out, and the few of us began yelling back to whoever it was out there in the dark, trying to get a response of any kind. We thought that maybe someone was lost. In these woods, it wouldn't be hard. "Hello? Is someone out there? Are you okay?" My girlfriend yelled, joined in by one of my friends, shouting through his cupped hands. "Hello!" All we heard in reply was what sounded like muffled voices, 2 voices, as if they were calling from a great distance. But it sounded like there was somebody moving around just on the far side of the nearby tree line, and they couldn't have been greater than 100 yards away. More echoing shouts came from that area, but they were still indiscernible. It sounded like 2 people shouting at the same time. Increasingly, I became nervous, wondering who was moving around out there, imagining backwoods creeps playing games with their victims. Here at midnight, something was wrong, I felt. For a short while, we heard nothing. One of my friends went to his gear and retrieved the old Ruger Bearcat 22 that his father gave him as a gift. "If someone wants to rush our camp, I'd like for us to be ready," he said. I nodded, feeling on edge. "Do you need help?" my cousin shouted again. In response came two voices shouting vaguely once more, still sounding distant. Before, they had sounded like someone shouting words, even if we couldn't quite make it out. But now the shouts were loud and garbled, wordless shouts and baying noises. Someone was moving around out there. My girlfriend said what I was thinking quietly. Who are these people? Why are they here, and why are they messing around somebody's camp right now? For the next half hour, there was silence besides the fire and the nightlife. We sat on guard around the fire, straining to listen. During that stretch, we heard no more shouting or footfalls. We resolved to keep the 22 around, just in case someone came barging into our camp. Several minutes later, we heard what sounded like people moving about only a short distance past the light cast by our fire. Footfalls and the crackle of branches and leaves. It sounded like someone was staggering around at a brisk speed, just out of our campsite. A couple of us expected someone to step into the light at any moment, but no one did. Suddenly, it stopped. Not another voice was heard, no footfalls, no crunching of grass or branches, nothing to indicate that the people or things that were by our camp were still there, or had even gone away for that matter. It was more like they had just started standing still. All of us were extremely nervous, especially with how the sounds of footsteps had just stopped instead of moving away. We were sure somebody was just watching us from a ways off and waiting for us to fall asleep. We managed to organize ourselves to sleep in shifts, at least 2 people to stay awake at all times while the others slept in our tents. It wasn't easy, especially with an odd-numbered group, but the rest of the night passed without incident, thankfully. In the morning, we nervously gathered our gear and decided to leave, the appeal of being out in the woods having vanished in the night. What disturbed me was how far off the voices had sounded, yet how closely the movements had come to us, and how they had disappeared so suddenly. I was certain that this was not just some people deciding to prank campers, or any sneaking backwoodsman having a good laugh. This was something else entirely.
When I was in about the 6th grade, a friend and I went to another girl's house, which was in the country, a few days before Halloween. We wanted spooky things to happen, so we did the typical preteen girl creepy slumber party activities, like playing with the Ouija board, doing Bloody Mary. The next evening, the girl who lived there told us that she heard of a crazy lady who lived nearby and threw stuff at people. We decided to take her golf cart and try and find her, then videotape her throwing stuff at us. We didn't. We got lost in the woods instead. All of a sudden, I saw something, or someone, floating in the distance. My friend turned on the camera and got out of the golf cart to get a closer look. We were scared, but curious now. "It's a person," I remembered saying. "Oh, he's dead. No, it's a Halloween decoration." My friend insisted. It was not a Halloween decoration. It's a dead body hanging from a tree. At first we thought he was murdered, then put up on display. The concept of suicide was not well formed in our heads, but the knocked over ladder and the tape confirmed this. My friend called the cops. When they arrived, we were told immediately to leave. I remembered a ton of police cars and an ambulance. They made us turn off the camera, which had been rolling the whole time, and call their mum to get us back to the home. The parents tried to convince us as we sat in the kitchen crying it wasn't real, but the police don't send kids home if it's not a dead body. Every year before Halloween, I have nightmares about this event. I'm on a hill in the dark. There are dead trees surrounding me with a dead body on each one. A few years ago, a friend and I went to explore a nearby limestone cave. I had been there before, but never went very deep. I had read of a waterfall which eventually led to an expansive area beyond, so we set out to try and find the path. Now, since we've never been on this route, we took turns going forward and checking back to avoid passing points of no return, without one of us being above with a rope to toss down. After the familiar routes behind us, we found a tight climb down. The squeeze was like going from the front seat to the back seat in a compact sedan. That's vertical. No problem. We find a tunnel, wide yet short. We took our packs and dragged them behind our feet while we crawled maybe 10 to 15 meters down. I was getting a little claustrophobic, but we knew what we're getting into. We came to a small opening about the size of a bathroom, the space we could stand in, so we had a bit of relief. The path forward was a small square tunnel, the same height as the previous one, but about 2 meters wide. We jokingly called it the coffin crawl. This route required us to go one behind the other and led to a 90-degree turn. At the turn, I could see the path continued past the range of my headlamp, but mostly all seemed level and safe. At this point, it became apparent that the path was getting more and more narrow, ever so slightly. If we want to turn back, we would have to crawl back single file. I could not speculate how far we crawled, but it seemed like a very long way, until I could see a small opening ahead, maybe the size of a cramped coat closet, but 2/3 the height. At this point, that space was looking pretty comforting, because it would mean we could at least turn around if we decide to go back. Right before the coming closet-sized space was the tightest space I'd ever crawled into in a cave. I mean, I literally had to place one arm ahead and drag the other one to get my shoulders to fit diagonally. As my light illuminated the closet space, I could see a single stalagmite in the center and some bats resting on its walls. It had walls that were sloped into the ceiling. Small mouse-eared bats. They sound really funny. Were infrequent, but not a shocking sight, until our voices disturbed them and they decided to exit. Past our prone one by one bodies. Their fluttering should have been non-threatening, but in combination with the inability to get out of there, it was very unsettling. It took a lot of mental control to avoid panic, apparent lack of air, and heebie-jeebies. After the bats had passed, I caught my breath, and we entered the small opening. Upon the single stalagmite was a small note, the torn corner of a piece of a notebook. The note read in blue pen, "Nothing here."